The North Atlantic, March 16, 1943. The ocean is a thing of impossible, malevolent size. It is not water. It is a shifting mountain range of liquid granite, gray and black, capped with frothing, wind-whipped peaks of white. The sky is the same color as the sea, a low, bruised ceiling of cloud that spits freezing rain. There is no horizon. There is only the sea and the sky, fused into a single monochromatic universe of cold. In the center of this universe is convoy SC-122, 40 merchant ships wallowing in the swell. They are the tethered goats of the Atlantic War. Fat, slow, rust-streaked tankers full of high-octane aviation fuel. Freighters packed with Sherman tanks, with crates of ammunition, with powdered eggs. They are the artery, the absolute lifeline that connects the factories of America to the war in Europe, and they are dying. This is not a battle. A battle implies a fight. This is a slaughter. Deep beneath the chaos, a different world. The U-432. The air inside is a thick, ripe cocktail of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and cooking cabbage. It is a smell you can taste. The boat is a steel coffin, 200 feet long, packed with 50 men who have not seen the sun in weeks. The commander, Kapitän Leutnant Heinz-Joachim Eckhardt, is a predator in his element. He is 27 years old. His face, illuminated by the faint red glow of the attack center, is pale, bedewed with sweat, but his eyes are perfectly calm. He is not a monster. He is a technician, a master of a deadly craft. He raises his eye from the periscope. The rubber eyepiece leaves a faint black ring around his socket. He gives a series of quiet, precise commands. His voice is a low murmur, barely audible over the hum of the electric motors and the rhythmic ping of the enemy's sonar, a sound they have learned to ignore. It is the sound of a blind man tapping his cane in a vast, dark room. Rohr 1, los. Tube 1, fire. A slight shudder runs through the submarine, a hiss of compressed air. And then, silence. Eckhardt does not wait to see the result. He is already swinging the periscope, acquiring his next target. Rohr 2, los. Tube 2, fire. On the surface, on the bridge of the British freighter SS King Griffith, the lookout sees it. A thin, white line, a scratch on the gray canvas of the sea, moving at an impossible speed. He opens his mouth to scream a warning. The word is never born. The torpedo strikes midship. The explosion is not a bang. It is a deep, guttural roar, the sound of a giant clearing its throat. A pillar of orange flame and black smoke erupts from the ship's side, climbing hundreds of feet into the freezing air. The King Griffith, a vessel of 5,000 tons, a thing of steel plates and rivets, simply breaks in half, as if it were a child's toy. The bow and stern rise up, pointing to the sky in a final obscene V, and then slide beneath the waves. It takes less than a minute. Where a ship was, there is now only a spreading stain of black oil and a smattering of floating debris. The escort, the HMS Lavender, a Flower-class corvette, sees the fireball. Her captain screams orders. Full ahead. They charge toward the smoke, a tiny, furious terrier chasing a ghost. Her sonar operator is shouting, contacts everywhere, echoes, wreckage. They have no idea where the U-boat is. They are guessing. The captain makes his guess. He orders a pattern of depth charges. The stern of the little ship erupts. Huge plumes of water, taller than the ship itself, are thrown into the air. The sound is a series of deafening, bone-jarring concussions that lifts the corvette out of the water. Miles away, deep in the cold, silent dark, the crew of the U-432 hears it. The explosions are distant, muffled thumps, the sound of a door slamming far away. It is the sound of failure. Eckhardt allows himself a thin, bloodless smile. He has already slipped away, his electric motors pushing him silently into the depths, leaving the blind, angry shepherd to guard a field of dead sheep. This is the established solution. It is the doctrine of the Battle of the Atlantic. It is the convoy system, a tactic from the age of sail, pitted against the apex predator of the industrial age. And it is a suicide pact. The Allies are not just losing this war, they are being bled white, one ship at a time, in the largest, most brutal, and most important battle of the entire Second World War. The story we know is the story of steel, the story of destroyers, of aircraft carriers, of the B-24 Liberator bomber. It is a story of massive, complex, expensive machines, piloted by brave men fighting a war of brute force. But this is not that story. This is the story of a weapon that weighed less than a man, a weapon with an engine you could hold in one hand, A weapon that was controlled by a man sitting in a chair, warm and dry, on the deck of a freighter. It is the story of an idea so simple, so cheap, so utterly outside the established rules of warfare that the men in charge did not just dismiss it, they laughed at it. This is the story of how an amateur, a model airplane enthusiast, with no military experience, no connections, and no funding, built a machine that could do what an entire navy could not. This is the story of a cardboard drone, and how, in one unbelievable afternoon, it changed the war. To understand the drone, you must first understand the problem. And the problem was the Atlantic Ocean. By 1943, the war had reached its absolute fulcrum. The Eastern Front was a raging inferno. The campaign in North Africa was grinding to its conclusion. The bomber offensive against Germany was just beginning to find its teeth. Every single part of this global conflict, every bullet, every boot, every gallon of gasoline, depended on one thing: the convoy. The United Kingdom was a fortress under siege. It produced tanks and planes, but it could not produce oil. It could not produce enough food. It was entirely, existentially dependent on the 10,000 ships of its merchant marine. Winston Churchill, a man not given to understatement, admitted that the U-boat menace was the only thing during the war that truly frightened him. He was right to be frightened. The German Kriegsmarine, under the brilliant and ruthless command of Admiral Karl Donitz, had one mission: to sever that artery, to starve Britain into submission. His weapon was the U-boat, and his strategy was the wolf pack. Donitz was not fighting a naval war, he was fighting a tonnage war, a war of mathematics. He knew he could not sink the Royal Navy. He did not have to. He only had to sink merchant ships faster than the Allies could build them. By early 1943, he was winning. The Allied solution was a grim, desperate calculus of its own. It was a system built around the convoy. Group the slow merchant ships together, surround them with a handful of armed escorts, and pray. The primary escort was the corvette, small, cheap, and mass-produced. They were manned by heroic, seasick men, but they were fundamentally defensive. Their main weapon was ASDIC, an early form of sonar. It worked by sending a sound wave, a ping, through the water. If it hit a submarine, it would bounce back. But it was a crude instrument. A school of fish, a thermal layer in the water, even the wake of another ship could produce a false echo. And it was essentially a close-range weapon. A U-boat could sit, silently, just a few miles away and be completely invisible. The other solution was air power. A long-range patrol bomber, like the American B-24 Liberator, was a U-boat's worst nightmare. It could appear suddenly from the clouds, dropping bombs or depth charges before the submarine had time to dive. But these were four-engine heavy bombers. They were complex, fantastically expensive, and required huge crews of highly trained specialists. There were never enough of them. The combination of these two failing systems created the war's most deadly piece of geography, the Mid-Atlantic Gap, the Black Pit. It was a vast 1,000-mile-wide stretch of ocean, too far from the air bases in Newfoundland and Iceland, too far from the bases in Britain. In this gap, the convoys were alone. It was here that Donitz's wolf packs gathered. A U-boat on patrol would spot a convoy, radio its position, and then shadow it, summoning other boats. They would gather, a pack of unseen wolves, and then, at night, they would strike. A dozen U-boats, attacking on the surface, where their low profiles made them nearly invisible, firing torpedoes into the herd of ships and then vanishing into the darkness. The institutional arrogance of the Allied High Command was the real enemy. In the wood-paneled offices of the Admiralty in London or the Navy Department in Washington, the problem was seen as one of resources. They needed more destroyers, they needed more aircraft carriers, they needed more four-engine bombers. The solution was always bigger, faster, more expensive. It was a war of industrial might, and they were the greatest industrial powers on Earth. They would simply build their way to victory. They were pouring billions of dollars into new ship designs, new radar systems, new code-breaking machines. These were all vital, but they were all expressions of the same philosophy, that the war would be won by complex systems operated by the military elite. The admirals and the air marshals were fighting a conventional war, a war of fleets and air forces. They could not see that Donitz was not fighting a conventional war. He was fighting a guerrilla war at sea, and it was working. The ticking clock was the relentless mathematics of the tonnage war. In March of 1943 alone, the month of convoy SC-122, the Wolfpacks would sink over 120 Allied ships, nearly 700,000 tons of shipping sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. It was the single most disastrous month of the entire war. The shipyards in Britain and America were working around the clock, but they could not keep up. The losses were unsustainable. Britain was 6 weeks from running out of fuel. The entire Allied war effort was teetering on the verge of collapse. The planned invasion of Europe was a fantasy. You could not invade a continent if you could not cross the ocean. The established system was failing. The convoys were floating graveyards. The escorts were chasing shadows. The bombers were too few. The high command, obsessed with its steel behemoths, was blind to the one thing that could change the equation. They needed eyes. They did not need more guns or more depth charges. They needed a way to see. A way to spot a U-boat from the air before it could strike. They needed an aircraft that was cheap enough to be disposable, small enough to fly from the deck of a simple freighter, simple enough to be operated by an ordinary sailor. They needed an aircraft that did not need a pilot. The system, in its infinite, arrogant wisdom, believed such a thing was impossible. It was a science fiction fantasy. It was a toy. The system was wrong. The solution already existed. It was sitting in a dusty garage in New Jersey, being built by a man the Navy had already rejected. A man who loved to build model airplanes. His name was Reginald Denny. And he was not an engineer, a scientist, or a military strategist. He was a movie star. Reginald Denny was the last man on Earth anyone would have chosen to solve the riddle of the Atlantic. He was not a naval architect. He was not an aeronautical engineer. He was a movie star. And not just any movie star. He was the quintessential, plummy-voiced, handsome Englishman of the 1930s Hollywood screen. He played charming fools in drawing-room comedies and stiff upper-lipped officers in colonial adventures. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and possessed a breezy, effortless confidence that made him a matinee idol. This was the man the public saw, the man the studio system sold. But this was a fiction. The real Reginald Denny was a man of oil-stained hands and a mind that buzzed with the high-pitched whine of a two-stroke engine. His real life was not lived on the sound stages of Burbank. It was lived in a cluttered garage behind his Beverly Hills home, a space that smelled not of grease paint and perfume, but of gasoline, sawdust, and the sharp, intoxicating tang of model airplane cement. He was a fanatic, an obsessive. Long after the directors yelled cut, Denny would be hunched over a workbench, his tuxedo replaced by a mechanic's apron, carefully sanding a balsa wood fuselage, or tinkering with the delicate, finicky clockwork of a radio control actuator. He was not a dilettante. He was a pioneer. In an era when model aviation was a hobby for children, Denny was building huge, gasoline-powered, radio-controlled aircraft of a size and sophistication no one had ever seen before. He was, in every sense of the word, an uncredentialed, overlooked outsider. The admirals in Washington were wrestling with billion-dollar budgets for battleships. Reginald Denny was wrestling with how to get a spark plug to fire reliably in an engine the size of a fist. But he possessed a unique qualification that no one in the Admiralty had. He had been a pilot. During the First World War, he had served as an observer and gunner in the Royal Flying Corps before it became the Royal Air Force. He had seen flimsy aircraft made of wood and fabric go up against machine guns. He had seen his friends die in flames. He understood in his bones the brutal, unforgiving reality of air combat. He was not just a tinkerer. He was a veteran. This was his eureka moment. And it did not arrive in a flash of genius. It came as a slow, creeping frustration. In the late 1930s, as the world slid toward war again, Denny watched the newsreels. He saw footage of American anti-aircraft gunners training for the coming storm. Their targets were large canvas sleeves, dragged slowly through the sky by other airplanes. It was a joke. It was like training a lion tamer by having him fight a house cat. The gunners were learning to track slow, straight-moving targets. The enemy they would soon face, the Messerschmitts and the Zeros, would be coming at them at 300 miles an hour, diving, twisting, and turning. The official doctrine was a fantasy. The training was setting men up to fail and to die. This was his unique, on-the-ground observation. The problem was not the guns, it was the targets. Denny looked at his beautiful, complex, radio-controlled planes buzzing around his workshop, and he saw the solution. What if, he thought, you could give the gunners a target that actually behaved like an enemy plane? A target that was fast, agile, and most importantly, cheap enough that you did not mind when it was shot down. He began drawing. He simplified his designs. He moved away from delicate balsa wood and toward molded plywood and spruce. He built a prototype. He called it the RP-1 for Radioplane 1. He loaded it into his station wagon and began making the rounds. He was laughed out of every office he visited. The dismissal was total, and it was contemptuous. He managed to get a meeting with officers from the Army Air Corps. They were polite in the way one is polite to a wealthy eccentric. He unrolled his blueprints. He showed them photographs of his model. "Sirs," he said, "this machine can fly at 60 miles an hour. It can simulate a dive bombing attack. It costs less than $100 to build. The officers looked at each other. They smiled thin, patronizing smiles. "Mr. Denny," one of them said, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a toy." It is a hobbyist's gadget. The United States Army does not fight its wars with toys. They asked about its operational ceiling. They asked about its durability under fire. The questions were designed to humiliate, to expose the idea as the folly of an amateur. He took it to the Navy. The response was even more frigid. An admiral's aide, a young lieutenant with a face of perfect, polished indifference, refused to even look at the plans. He told Denny that the Navy's training needs were being met by existing systems. He suggested Mr. Denny stick to making motion pictures. It was what he was good at. The system did not just reject his idea, it questioned his sanity for even proposing it. He was a movie star. What could he possibly know about modern warfare? He was an outsider, a nobody, a man with no credentials who had the audacity to suggest that their entire training doctrine was wrong. The institutional leadership, the men with medals and degrees, saw a cardboard airplane. They were blind to the revolution it represented. This was the catalyst. It was no longer about training. It was about the war. The news from the Atlantic was a drumbeat of disaster. Every day, the papers were filled with the names of sunken ships. He read about the wolf packs. He read about the Black Pit. He read about the heroic, hopeless charges of the corvettes, dropping depth charges on ghosts. And he connected the two ideas. The contempt of the admirals and the slaughter in the Atlantic were the same problem. They were a failure of imagination. The admirals were looking for a bigger ship, a better depth charge. They were looking for a new way to fight in the dark. Denny realized they did not need a better weapon. They needed a light switch. His little drone, his toy, could be that light. You could mount it on a simple catapult on the deck of any freighter. You could launch it when you entered the Black Pit. It had a 2-hour flight time. A man with a simple radio control box could send it out, flying a search pattern 10, 20 miles ahead of the convoy. The U-boats attacked from the surface. They were low in the water, but they were not invisible. They could be seen from the air. His drone could circle, it could hover, it could fix the U-boat's position and radio it back to the escort ships. It would turn their blind guessing game into a precise, targeted hunt. It would turn the sheepdog into a wolf. It was not a weapon. It was a pair of eyes. A cheap, disposable, $200 pair of eyes that could see over the horizon. The rejection by the system no longer felt like a personal failure. It felt like a crime. He was not going to write any more letters. He was not going to beg for any more meetings. He was going to build it himself. He was going to break the rules. Not the military's rules, but the rules of a system that said an actor could not build a weapon, that a hobbyist could not solve a strategic crisis. He took out a second mortgage on his house. He cashed in his war bonds. He borrowed money from his friends in Hollywood, other actors who saw the fire in his eyes. He formed a company. He called it the Radioplane Company. He rented a derelict factory building in Van Nuys, California. This was his unauthorized test. He was not just building a prototype. He was building a weapon system, without a client, without a contract, fueled by nothing more than his own conviction and his own cash. He and a small team of fellow model airplane fanatics, carpenters, and garage mechanics began to work. They designed a new model, the OQ-2. It was the definition of simplicity. The fuselage was a sleek tube of molded plywood. The wings were straight, square, made from spruce spars and covered in doped fabric, the same material he had seen on the fighters of the First World War. The engine was the key. It was a tiny, brilliant little thing, a 2-cylinder, 2-stroke motor that produced 6 horsepower. It was started, not with an electric ignition, but by a frantic pull on a rope like a modern lawnmower. The whole aircraft weighed 75 pounds. It was, in essence, a flying engine with just enough cardboard and wood attached to keep it in the air. The control system was equally crude. A simple joystick housed in a metal box that translated the operator's movements into radio signals. There was no feedback. There was no video screen. The operator had to fly the drone purely by sight. By the summer of 1941, it was ready. There was no military airfield, no official testing range. The test site was a dry lake bed near the Mojave. This was the "it works" moment. It was a day of shimmering, oppressive heat. The only audience was Denny's small team and 2 junior Army officers, a young captain and a lieutenant, who had been persuaded, mostly out of curiosity, to make the long drive from Los Angeles. They stood by their car, arms folded, their faces radiating a deep and profound skepticism. The OQ-2 was mounted on a crude, homemade catapult, powered by a set of stretched bungee cords. The engine was started. It coughed to life with a sound of incredible, disproportionate rage, a high-pitched, angry wasp buzz that echoed across the empty desert. The catapult was triggered. The little drone shot forward, wobbled for a terrifying second, and then climbed, clawing its way into the bright, hazy sky. The operator, a young man named Dave, stood calmly, his eyes on the speck in the distance, his thumbs moving delicately on the control box. The drone did not just fly. It performed. Dave sent it into a steep climb, then a banking turn. He put it into a dive, pulling out just a few feet above the desert floor, the sound of its tiny engine screaming. It was stable, it was fast, it was, for all intents and purposes, a real airplane. The two Army officers were no longer smiling. They were staring, their mouths slightly agape. Denny walked over to them. He said, "Now, let's see if you can hit it." The officers had brought a team of their best anti-aircraft machine gunners. The gunners set up their weapon. They were confident, cocky. They had never failed to hit the canvas sleeves. Dave sent the OQ-2 on a simulated strafing run. It came in low and fast. The machine gun roared, spitting tracers into the sky. And they missed. The drone zipped past unharmed. The gunners cursed, re-aimed, and waited for the next pass. It came from a different angle. Again, the gun roared, and again, they missed. The drone was too small, too fast, too unpredictable. It moved with a twitchy, insect-like agility that their human minds could not track. For 20 minutes, they blazed away. They filled the sky with lead, and they never touched it. They were trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. Finally, the drone's engine sputtered and died. Its fuel was spent. It glided down, landing with a gentle skid on the hard-packed earth. There was a long silence, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the desert wind. The Army captain walked over to the drone. It was completely undamaged. He touched the fabric wing, then the little propeller. He looked at Denny, and the skepticism in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a look of dawning, world-altering comprehension. He did not see a toy. He saw the future. He said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "You need to build us 1,000 of these." The test was a success, an impossible success. The stupid idea, the actor's folly, was genius. Denny had not received a contract. He had earned one, in the heat and dust of the Mojave. His cardboard airplane was about to go to war, but it was not going to be a target. It was going to be a hunter. The captain's report was a grenade rolled into the polished corridors of power. The news of the successful test landed not with a cheer, but with a quiet, bureaucratic thud. The Army Air Corps, impressed and slightly embarrassed by its gunners' dismal performance, placed an order. The number was not 1,000, it was 59. The Radioplane OQ-2 was officially designated the A-2, the A for aerial target. The system had looked at Reginald Denny's revolutionary weapon, his pair of eyes, and it had seen a clay pigeon. This was the boardroom. Not a literal room at first, but a war of memos and reports, a battle fought with carbon paper and filing cabinets. Denny's company was now, officially, a defense contractor. But he was a contractor for the wrong war. He was building targets. His vision of a U-boat hunter was a footnote, a crackpot addendum to an otherwise successful procurement file. The captain from the Mojave test, now Denny's fiercest advocate within the system, wrote glowing reports. He argued that the A-2's potential was being squandered. He suggested its application for reconnaissance, for spotting. His reports were filed and ignored. The real boardroom was in Washington, D.C., a cavern of mahogany and old cigar smoke, a place where maps covered the walls and the fate of the world was decided by old men with heavy gold rings on their fingers. This was the office of the Chief of Naval Operations. Through sheer persistence and by calling in every favor he had in Hollywood, Denny and his Army captains secured a meeting. Not with the chief, but with a rear admiral. A man whose name was synonymous with battleship doctrine. He was a gun club admiral, a man who believed the only thing that settled a naval conflict was a 14-inch shell, accurately delivered. He sat behind a desk the size of a small boat, a vast, polished ocean of wood that separated him from his visitors. He did not rise when they entered. He gestured to two small, hard chairs. He had their proposal on his desk, but he did not look at it. He looked at Reginald Denny, and his eyes, the color of a winter sea, held a look of profound, almost bored contempt. This was the system, in its purest form. A man of immense, unquestioned authority facing a man he considered a court jester. The Army captain, young and earnest, made the presentation. He was nervous. He laid out the specifications of the drone. He explained the concept. A low-cost, air-launched reconnaissance platform. A set of expendable eyes for every convoy. He called it an aerial sentry. The admiral did not speak. He picked up a thick, unlit cigar and rolled it between his fingers. Then Denny, leaning forward, made his plea. He spoke not of engineering, but of men. He spoke of the merchant sailors, of the corvette crews, fighting blind. He said, "Admiral, we are giving them a periscope that can fly, a way to see the wolf before he is at the door." He spoke of the geometry of the U-boat attack, of the need to push the detection perimeter out beyond the range of sonar. The Admiral finally looked at the file. He flipped through a few pages, his expression unchanging. Then he closed it with a soft, final thud. He looked at Denny. He said, "Mr. Denny, you make moving pictures, very entertaining ones, I am told. You are an expert in make-believe. The United States Navy is in the business of reality." This was the institutional arrogance distilled to a single voice. The Admiral saw the drone not as a tool, but as a philosophical threat. The Navy was a brotherhood of sailors, of men who went to sea in ships of steel to fight other men. This gadget, this unmanned toy, it was an abdication of that ethos. It was cowardly. It was an attempt to fight a war from a chair, to send a machine to do a man's job. He called it an unseemly and unnaval proposition. He jabbed the cigar toward the captain. He told him that the Navy had the finest patrol aircraft in the world, the Catalina and the Liberator. He said that the problem of the U-boat would be solved by more destroyers, better sonar, and the courage of American sailors, not by a plywood novelty. The captain tried to argue. He mentioned the black pit. He mentioned the lack of carriers. The Admiral cut him off. He stood up, a signal the meeting was over. He said, "Leave the war at sea to the sailors, Mr. Denny." He turned his back on them and looked at the map on his wall, a map crawling with the symbols of his great steel fleets. They were dismissed. The system had not just rejected the idea, it had declared it an insult. The door to the Navy was closed, bolted, and locked. The cardboard drone would be a target, and nothing more. Denny and his captain walked out into the cold Washington air, defeated. The dream was dead. The official channels, the proper procedures, had led to a brick wall. But the war did not follow proper procedures. The war was a mathematical meat grinder. And the numbers were getting worse. March 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its terrifying climax. The teletype machines in the Navy's convoy control centers never stopped chattering. They were metallic, pitiless things, spitting out endless ribbons of paper that were the death notices of ships. SS King Griffith, sunk. MV Canadian Star, sunk. SS Southern Princess, sunk. Each name was a world, a crew of 40 men, a cargo of 10,000 tons, vanished. The red pins on the Admiral's wall map were a pox. The black pit was a charnel house. The system was breaking. The doctrine of steel and courage was failing, catastrophically. The men who had to read the teletype reports, the mid-level officers who had to plan the convoy routes, they knew the truth. They were sending men to their deaths. This was the gamble. It was born not in a moment of inspiration, but in an abyss of desperation. The man who made the gamble was a commander in the Navy's escort command, a man named Frank Elmore. Elmore was not a battleship admiral. He was a logistician, a man of numbers, of timetables, of tonnage lost versus tonnage delivered. He saw the war not as a matter of honor, but as a problem of calculus, and his calculus told him they were losing. He had seen the Army's reports on the A-2 target drone. He had seen the memo detailing the Admiral's rejection of Denny's proposal, and he saw the madness of it. His office was a cramped, windowless space, deep in the bowels of the Navy building. The air was stale, thick with the smell of coffee and cigarettes, and always, in the background, the relentless chatter of the teletype. He sat at his desk one night, staring at the route for a new convoy, SC-123, a slow convoy, bound for Liverpool, 42 ships. Its route would take it directly through the heart of the pit, at a time when intelligence reported the largest gathering of wolf packs yet seen. It was a suicide mission. The escorts assigned were a handful of corvettes and a single ancient destroyer. It was all they had. Elmore looked at the casualty projections. He looked at the manifest of the ships. Fuel, food, tanks, everything needed for the invasion of Europe that was supposed to happen next year. An invasion that would never happen if this convoy and the ones like it did not get through. He made a decision. It was the end of his career, and he knew it. It was a flagrant violation of a dozen regulations. It was direct insubordination to his commanding officer, the Admiral, who had dismissed Denny. He did not care. The system was wrong. The doctrine was a failure. The experts were fools. He was going to make a bet. He was going to gamble the lives of the men on SC-123 on an actor's toy. He picked up the phone. He did not call the Admiral. He called a supply depot in Virginia. He spoke to a lieutenant he knew, a man who owed him a favor. He used the beautiful, labyrinthine logic of military bureaucracy. He told the lieutenant he was running a new, high-priority anti-aircraft training program for merchant marine crews, top secret. He told him he needed 6 Army A-2 target drones with their control units and operators delivered to the port of Halifax, immediately. He signed the requisition forms himself, burying them under a mountain of other paperwork, a needle of treason in a haystack of official procedure. He called the Army captain, Denny's advocate. He told him what he was doing. He asked him if he could get him 2 of Radioplane's best civilian operators, men who could not just fly the drones, but fix them, men who would be willing to volunteer for a sea voyage on a freighter into the most dangerous waters in the world. Then he made his most dangerous call, to the captain of one of the freighters in the convoy, a grizzled 60-year-old Norwegian named Olaf Johansen, captain of a rust-bucket tramp steamer called the SS Perseverance. Elmore knew Johansen. He was a man who had been torpedoed twice already and had survived. He was a man who hated U-boats with a religious passion. Elmore laid it out. He told him he was sending him a secret weapon, a thing made of wood and fabric. He told him it was unauthorized. He told him that if they were caught, Johansen would lose his master's license and Elmore would go to prison. There was a long silence on the line. Johansen, from his cabin in Halifax Harbor, looked out at the cold gray water. He had seen too many friends die. He had seen too many ships go down. He said, "Commander, if you send me a kite with a rock tied to it and tell me it will sink a U-boat, I will fly it from my mainmast." The gamble was on. The operation was a conspiracy of whispers and shadows. The 6 drones arrived in Halifax in large anonymous wooden crates marked gunnery training targets. They were loaded onto the Perseverance at night, stowed below decks. 2 young men from Denny's factory in Van Nuys, their faces pale with a mixture of excitement and terror, came aboard, listed on the manifest as civilian gunnery technicians. They brought with them a crude, homemade catapult, which they bolted to the aft deck of the freighter, hidden from view under a canvas tarp. The convoy commodore, the man in overall charge of the 42 ships, was not told. The escort commander, the senior naval officer, was not told. This was a rogue operation, hidden inside the vast, lumbering machine of the convoy system. On March 20th, 1943, convoy SC-123 slipped out of Halifax. The 42 merchant ships formed their clumsy columns. The handful of tiny escorts took up their positions on the flanks, their sonar pinging, searching the cold, dark water. They were a herd of sheep, heading for a valley full of wolves. But on one of those sheep, hidden under a tarp, was a weapon no one in the German or Allied High Command knew existed. The cardboard drones were going to war. The desperate commander had made his move. The actor's folly was about to face its ultimate unauthorized test in the center of the Black Pit. The 5th day in the Black Pit. The world has shrunk to a circle of gray water and gray sky. For the men of convoy SC-123, time has lost its meaning. There is only the endless, nauseating heave of the Atlantic swell and the constant, thrumming vibration of the engines. The tension is a physical thing, a sickness in the gut. They are being watched. They can feel it. 15 miles ahead of the convoy, the feeling is not tension, it is anticipation. The U-228 has broken the surface. The sea sluices from her dark gray hull. The conning tower is a small black island in the desolation. On the bridge, the commander, Korvettenkapitan Dietrich Wildung, breathes the cold, salt air. He is a veteran of a dozen patrols, an ace. He is a man with a predator's patience. Below him, in the warmth of the control room, his radio man has been listening. He knows the convoy is coming. He is the scout. He has already sent the signal. The wolves are gathering. Wildung raises his binoculars. He scans the horizon. Nothing. Just the endless gray. He is not worried. His hydrophones can hear the rhythmic, clumsy beat of their propellers, the sound of approaching sheep. He looks at his own vessel, at the lean, deadly lines of his Type 6I U-boat. It is the perfect killing machine for this perfect hunting ground. He feels a professional's contempt for his enemy, the pathetic little corvettes charging about, dropping their depth charges at shadows, the fat, slow merchants wallowing toward their doom. It is not a war, it is a harvest. A report comes from the radio room. 3 other boats have acknowledged. They are converging. He gives the order to submerge. The U-228 slips beneath the waves, a whisper of foam, leaving the ocean empty again. The arrogant advance has begun. Wilding will shadow the convoy, staying just outside the range of their useless sonar, guiding the rest of the pack in for a synchronized slaughter at dusk. The plan is perfect. It has always worked. On the aft deck of the SS Perseverance, the plan is chaos. The wind is a physical force trying to tear the canvas tarp from the hands of the 2 young technicians from California. Captain Johansen stands with them, his ancient face carved from granite, his hands clenched behind his back. The crew, huddled by the rail, watches with a mixture of pity and scorn. They are watching the birth of a joke. The tarp comes away. It reveals the thing. the Radioplane OQ-2. It sits on its crude catapult, looking impossibly fragile. It is a child's toy, a thing of plywood and fabric, its little two-stroke engine exposed to the elements. The merchant sailors, men who understand the brutal physics of steel and steam, look at the drone and then at each other. They do not laugh out loud. The presence of their grim-faced captain prevents it, but their faces are a symphony of disbelief. This is the secret weapon? A flying lawnmower? They are going to fight a U-boat wolfpack with a model airplane? The two technicians, whose names are Tom and Dave, are not laughing. They are fighting the pitching of the deck, their faces pale with seasickness and fear. This is not the dry lake bed of the Mojave. This is the Atlantic. Tom pulls the starter rope for the engine. It sputters. He pulls again. A cough of blue smoke. Nothing. The wind howls. On the third pull, the tiny engine catches, erupting with its furious wasp-like scream. The sound is thin, pathetic, almost instantly swallowed by the immense deep roar of the ocean. Dave is at the controls, a simple metal box with a joystick. He gives a thumbs up, a gesture of confidence he does not feel. Captain Johansson nods. He has made his gamble. Now he must watch the cards fall. He gives the order. Launch the machine. The catapult fires. The drone shoots off the rail, dips sickeningly toward a gray wave, and for a heart-stopping second, it seems destined for the sea. Then its little engine bites. It climbs. It circles the freighter once, a fragile, buzzing moth in the vastness, and then Dave turns it east, sending it out, away from the convoy, into the empty sky ahead. The new, unlikely tactic is in action. Dave does not see what the drone sees. There is no camera. He flies by instinct, by the memory of a map, by the sheer power of his trained sight. He keeps the drone low, just a few hundred feet above the churning waves. It is a tiny speck, a gnat against the gray ceiling of the sky. He flies a creeping line-ahead pattern, sweeping the ocean miles in front of the convoy. 10 minutes pass, 15. The men on the deck of the Perseverance have lost sight of it. The experiment, it seems, is a failure. But Dave sees it. A flicker of movement, a disturbance, a shape on the water that is not a wave. It is a line, too straight, too dark. He nudges the joystick, sending the drone into a gentle banking turn. He squints, his eyes watering in the wind, and then he sees it clearly. A conning tower. The sleek black shape of a U-boat running on the surface, its crew visible on the bridge. It is the U-228. Dietrich Wilding, the patient hunter, is completely unaware he is being watched. He is 10 miles from the convoy, perfectly positioned, utterly confident in his invisibility. On the bridge of the Perseverance, the radio crackles. It is Tom relaying Dave's report. A single U-boat. He gives the bearing and the range. The numbers are precise. Captain Johansson grabs his own radio microphone. He does not call the convoy Commodore. He calls the lead escort, the HMS Lavender, the same corvette that had charged so blindly after the ghost that sank the King Griffith. He speaks in a low, urgent voice. He tells the corvette's young captain that he has a confirmed visual on a surfaced submarine. He gives him the coordinates. The captain of the Lavender is baffled. A visual? From where? He is the eyes of the convoy. He sees nothing. His sonar is silent. He asks Johansson to repeat. Johansson repeats. His voice is cold iron. He says, "I have an eye in the sky. Trust me." On the bridge of the U-228, a lookout shouts. It is a sound of confusion, not alarm. He points. An aircraft. Dietrich Wilding raises his binoculars. He sees it. A tiny, strange-looking plane. It is moving slowly, circling them. His mind races. It is impossible. They are in the center of the gap. A Liberator is a 4-engine monster. A Catalina is a giant. This thing, it has no markings. It makes a bizarre, high-pitched buzzing noise. It is a toy. What is this foolishness? It does not drop bombs. It does not fire rockets. It just circles. A persistent, watching, infuriating fly. This is the moment of bafflement. The German commander, the master of this domain, cannot process what he is seeing. His perfect system, his understanding of the war, does not have a category for this. Then the bafflement turns to ice-cold dread. He hears a new sound, the high-speed beat of propellers. The sound of a charging corvette. The toy was not the threat. The toy was the spotter. He has been seen. He screams the order. Alarm! Tauchen! Crash dive! The crew scrambles from the bridge. The klaxon blares. The U-228 begins its slide into the depths. But it is too late. The HMS Lavender, guided not by a vague sonar echo, but by a precise, real-time visual location, is already on top of them. The corvette does not need to guess. She knows exactly where to drop her charges. The sea erupts. The depth charges are a perfect bracket. Deep beneath the surface, the steel hull of the U-228 groans, buckles, and then implodes. The perfect killing machine is crushed like a tin can. A spreading slick of black oil and a scattering of debris are the only signs that it ever existed. The tactic is proven. The unlikely hero, a cardboard drone, has drawn first blood. Aboard the other U-boats of the Wolfpack, the news is received with stunned disbelief. Wilding, one of their best, is gone. His last frantic message had been a garbled, confused report of a strange, tiny aircraft. The other commanders dismiss it as a dying man's fantasy. They press their attack. On the Perseverance, Dave lands the first drone, a tricky, nerve-wracking maneuver that involves catching it in a large net. A second drone is already on the catapult. They are not waiting. They launch again. The new drone flies a different pattern, sweeping the convoy's port flank. Within 20 minutes, it finds another one, the U-405. Its commander, arrogant and determined, is racing on the surface to get into position for the dusk attack. He sees the tiny drone approaching. He does not dive. He is furious. He orders his men to man the deck gun. This is the enemy's panic. The sight of this tiny, buzzing machine has broken their discipline. They begin firing at the drone, a 20mm cannon barking uselessly at the sky. They are trying to kill a mosquito with a cannon. It is a display of pure, impotent rage. While they are distracted, shooting at the sky, a second escort, guided by the drone's radio reports, closes in. The U-405 sees it too late. It dives, but the depth charges follow it down. Another slick of oil. Another kill. The Wolfpack is no longer a pack. It is a terrified, scattered group of individuals. Their perfect, coordinated attack has turned into a nightmare of confusion. They are being hunted from the air, in a place where there should be no air power. Their commanders are screaming over the radio. What is this weapon? Where is it coming from? Is it a new type of carrier? Is it a ghost? Commander Elmore's gamble is paying off in a way he could not have imagined. He had hoped to save his convoy. He was, in fact, dismantling an entire German naval strategy. The third U-boat is the hardest to find. It is the U-91, commanded by a cautious, cunning officer. He heard the reports. He heard the panic. He stays submerged. He is creeping in, using his hydrophones, the old way. He is blind, but he is safe. But the drone is not a weapon of the day. It is a weapon of endurance. The two operators on the Perseverance fly in shifts. They launch a third drone as the afternoon light begins to fail. They fly a slow, patient grid. They are not looking for a submarine. They are looking for a periscope. And they find it. A tiny feather of white water, a thin steel tube breaking the surface for just a few seconds. It is enough. The drone circles the spot, a silent, buzzing angel of death. The position is relayed. The HMS Lavender, her crew now working with a chilling newfound efficiency, races to the coordinates. The depth charges fall, and the Atlantic claims a third victim. 3 U-boats, spotted and killed, in a single afternoon, by a weapon made of cardboard and glue launched from the deck of a rusty freighter. The attack on SC-123 is over. The Wolfpack is broken. They are not just defeated, they are terrified. They flee, broadcasting frantic, contradictory reports of a secret Allied weapon, a swarm of tiny, unkillable aircraft. On the bridge of the SS Perseverance, Captain Johansen watches the last drone land. The merchant crew, the men who had been ready to laugh, are silent. They stare at the small, oil-stained machine with a kind of holy reverence. The 2 young technicians from California are slumped over their control box, exhausted but alive with a wild electric energy. They have done the impossible. The radio crackles. It is the escort commander. His voice is full of a deep, profound, and utter bafflement. He asks Captain Johansen, in a voice stripped of all military formality, "What in God's name is that thing you have on your ship?" The validation is complete. The actor's folly, the system's joke, is now the most lethal anti-submarine weapon in the entire Allied arsenal. The news arrived at the headquarters of the Befehlshaber der U-Boote in Lorient, France, not as a thunderclap, but as a series of quiet, baffling inconsistencies. Admiral Karl Donitz was a man of cold, hard numbers. His war was an exercise in pure, brutal logic. Tonnage sunk versus U-boats lost. It was a mathematical equation, and for months he had been solving it. The reports from the attack on convoy SC-123 did not compute. His office was a place of austere, functional order. On the wall, the great map of the Atlantic, the hunting ground, crisscrossed with the tracks of convoys and the positions of his wolf packs. But the pins that marked the fate of Waldung, of the U-228, of the U-405, and the U-91 were now marked with a black X. 3 of his most experienced commanders, 3 lethal boats, lost. In a single engagement. And the convoy, SC-123, had sailed on, untouched. Not a single freighter had been sunk. The system, Donitz's perfect system of coordinated attack, had never failed like this. He read the after-action reports from the surviving U-boat captains. The words on the page were a fever dream. They were the ramblings of broken, terrified men. They spoke of a new Allied weapon, but their descriptions were nonsense. They spoke of swarms of tiny aircraft appearing from nowhere in the middle of the ocean. They said the planes were no bigger than a man. They made a strange, high-pitched buzzing sound. They carried no bombs that could be seen. They simply circled, like vultures, guiding the destroyers to their prey. The intelligence officers of the Kriegsmarine, men as logical and precise as their commander, were stumped. They laid out the possibilities. A new type of escort carrier, smaller than anything they had ever seen? Impossible. They would have detected it. A new catapult-launched float plane? Perhaps, but why so small? Why so slow? The reports were dismissed as combat fatigue, as hysteria. The official conclusion was that the convoy had been lucky, that it had stumbled into a pocket of unusually effective air cover from a long-range patrol that had gone undetected. The reports of the tiny drones were filed away under the heading of battlefield phenomena, a euphemism for hallucination. The German High Command, like their Allied counterparts just weeks before, was faced with a truth that did not fit their doctrine, and so they rejected it. They could not conceive that their multi-million Reichsmark submarines, the apex of naval engineering, had been defeated by a weapon that cost less than one of their torpedoes. Their arrogance was a mirror image of the Allied admirals. It was the blind spot of the expert, the institutional refusal to believe that the rules of the game could be so fundamentally, so cheaply rewritten by an outsider. In Washington, the reaction was not disbelief. It was a frantic, bureaucratic scramble to claim ownership of a miracle. Commander Frank Elmore was not court-martialed. He was quietly promoted and given a medal. His act of career-ending insubordination was rewritten in the official histories as a bold, forward-thinking field test. The admiral who had declared Reginald Denny's idea an unseemly and un-naval proposition was now forced to sign the emergency procurement order. It was for 5,000 units. The Radioplane OQ-2, the A-2 aerial target, was given a new, more suitably martial designation, the TDD, Target Drone Denny. The system, in its infinite capacity for self-preservation, did not admit its failure. It absorbed its success. The rogue operation, the desperate gamble, was now official policy. Within months, crude catapults and buzzing cardboard drones were being installed on the decks of merchant ships and escort carriers across the Atlantic. The Black Pit, once the U-boat's safest hunting ground, was becoming a death trap. The drone did not win the Battle of the Atlantic by itself, but it was the tipping point. It was the light switch that Denny had imagined, illuminating the dark corners where the wolves had hidden, and allowing the brute force of Allied naval power to finally be applied with precision. And what of the hero? What of the man whose obsession, whose stubborn refusal to accept the system's verdict had changed the course of the war? Reginald Denny did not go on a victory tour. He was not invited to the White House. He did not advise the admirals who had once laughed at him. He went back to work. His small company, the Radioplane factory in Van Nuys, exploded. The small team of hobbyists and garage mechanics became a workforce of thousands. The factory ran 24 hours a day, churning out the simple, brilliant little aircraft. The sound of their two-stroke engines became the soundtrack of the San Fernando Valley. Among the thousands of new workers on his assembly line, carefully assembling the fuselages and wiring the control servos, was a young woman named Norma Jean Daugherty. An army photographer, taking pictures for a story on women in the war industry, would snap her photograph. The picture would make her famous, and she would soon change her name to Marilyn Monroe. A movie star had started the company, and in the strange, circular logic of Hollywood, it would create another one. Denny oversaw it all, not as a distant executive, but as an engineer. He was happiest on the factory floor, his hands dirty, refining the engine, improving the control surfaces. He had solved the problem he had set out to solve. After the war, when the contracts ended and the factory scaled down, he returned to his old life. He went back to making movies, playing the charming Englishman in one last round of light comedies. He went back to his workshop, tinkering with new designs, new engines. He lived a long and successful life, a man who was famous for being a movie star, while the true, world-altering nature of his real work remained a footnote, a piece of obscure military trivia. He was a man who had forged a key that unlocked a victory, and the system he saved had quietly put his name on the key ring and hung it on a hook, out of sight. The moral is not simply that the little guy can beat the giant. It is a lesson far more fundamental. It is about the nature of warfare itself. The admirals on both sides believed the war would be won by bigger ships, bigger guns, and more armor. They believed in the physics of destruction. Their doctrine was built on the idea of steel striking steel. Reginald Denny, the outsider, the uncredentialed tinkerer, understood a different truth. He understood that the decisive weapon is not always the one that makes the loudest bang. It is the one that provides the most perfect piece of information. The cardboard drone was not a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of perception. It did not sink U-boats. It revealed them. And in revealing them, it sentenced them to death. It proved that the most valuable territory on any battlefield is the high ground. And in the vast, featureless expanse of the Atlantic, the only high ground was in the air. The drone was a cheap, disposable, and brilliant way to seize that ground. It was an idea that was fundamentally asymmetrical. The billion-dollar industrial might of the Allied navies was being fought to a standstill by a few hundred guerrilla submarines. Denny's drone was the perfect counter-guerrilla weapon. It was cheap, numerous, and it took away the submarine's greatest advantage, its invisibility. The failure of the admirals was a failure of imagination. They were trapped by their own doctrine, by the culture of their institution. They could not see the answer because it came in a shape they did not recognize. It came from a man they did not respect. It was a lesson as old as warfare itself. The system that cannot adapt, the doctrine that cannot be questioned, is already defeated. It is merely waiting for the right, simple, stupid idea to come along and prove it. This is the full circle. This is the legacy. Travel forward in time. Leave the gray, cold Atlantic of 1943. Go to the quiet, air-conditioned darkness of a trailer in the Nevada desert. A young man, an airman, sits in a comfortable chair. He is not wearing a flight suit. He is wearing a simple uniform. In his hands is a joystick, a direct descendant of the one Dave used on the pitching deck of the SS Perseverance. On the screen in front of him is a silent, high-definition, God's-eye view of a village halfway around the world. He is flying an MQ-9 Reaper. It is a sleek, gray, multi-million-dollar angel of death, bristling with sensors and armed with Hellfire missiles. It is the apex predator of the 21st century. It is complex, it is lethal, it is the center of an entire new doctrine of warfare. But it is not new. It is the same idea. It is a pair of eyes sent to a place a man cannot or should not go. It is an unmanned aircraft, controlled from a safe distance, whose primary purpose is not to fight, but to watch. It is the full, terrifying, and brilliant realization of the dream that was born in a movie star's garage. The unauthorized, heretical idea, the one that was laughed at, the one that was dismissed as a toy, is now the absolute, unquestioned center of modern military power. The line from the cardboard drone to the Reaper is direct, unbroken, and profound. It is the story of how a simple truth, once revealed, can never be unseen. The truth that the man who sees the battlefield most clearly is the man who will win. The fragile, buzzing, plywood machine that saved convoy SC-123 was more than a weapon. It was a prophecy. It was the ghost of a future war, appearing in the skies of the past, a quiet, insistent buzz that would grow, over the decades, into the defining sound of a new century.